What if the silence you fear is not the end, but the sound of someone wrestling with feelings they do not know how to hold? What if the person stepping back is not losing interest, but losing their balance the moment the connection starts to feel real? That is where most people walk away too soon. They see distance and call it disinterest. They feel confusion and call it a final answer. But sometimes the story is not that simple. Sometimes the pullback is hiding pressure, panic, and a quiet fight inside the heart of someone who wants closeness and fears it at the same time. And if you have ever felt someone leave, then return, then leave again, this is for you. Stay with me, because the smallest signs often carry the deepest truth. And the next few minutes may help you see the difference between a bond that is slowly growing and a pattern that is only keeping you stuck. Watch closely. The details matter here, because when someone is avoidant, the truth is rarely loud. It moves in shadows. It shows up in pauses, half-finished sentences, and in the strange way they keep finding their way back to you even after they create distance. That return means something. Not always everything, but never nothing. Consistency with an avoidant person almost never looks like steady closeness. It looks quieter than that, stranger than that. It often appears in the pattern of return. At first, their distance can feel personal, like proof that you cared more than they did. It can feel like every silence is a small rejection and every step back is a verdict. But if you slow down and really observe, another pattern can begin to show. They pull away, yet they do not fully vanish. They make space, yet something in them keeps turning back toward you. That matters. People who feel nothing do not circle back again and again. They do not check in. They do not re-enter your space in awkward, unfinished ways. They do not try, even in small amounts, to reconnect after silence. That repeated return often points to an inner struggle they have not learned to calm. Connection stirs too much in them. It asks too much. It brings them too close to feelings they cannot easily manage. So they retreat. But then the bond pulls on them again, and back they come. Now here is the part many people miss. The real sign is not just that they return, it is whether those returns carry even a small shift, a little more honesty, a little less distance, a little more steadiness than before. Stay with this, because random reappearances are not the same as real emotional movement. One is habit, the other is growth. Subtle vulnerability in an avoidant person does not arrive with a speech. It does not come wrapped in clear words or perfect timing. It slips out in fragments, small openings, short flashes of truth that vanish almost as soon as they appear. If you are waiting for a dramatic confession, you may miss the real signs completely. It may show up in the way they pause before changing the subject, like they were about to say something real but could not stay there long enough to let it land. It may come in one honest sentence spoken too fast, without explanation, as if they needed to let it out, and then immediately protect themselves from what they just revealed. Sometimes it appears through reaction, more than language. A subject touches them more deeply than they admit. A silence becomes heavy in a way indifference never is. A joke covers a wound you can almost hear beneath the surface. Then, almost right away, they step back again. And that is what makes it so confusing. You feel an opening. Then the door closes. But the fact that it opened at all is meaningful, not because it guarantees a future, but because it shows there is something alive underneath the defense. For someone who has learned to hide emotion in order to feel safe, even a brief moment of realness is effort. It is movement. It is a part of them reaching beyond control, even if only for a second. And yes, that second matters. Effort from an avoidant rarely sounds the way most people expect love or care to sound. It is usually not wrapped in frequent reassurance. It does not often come through long emotional talks or steady verbal comfort. Instead, it moves through action, quiet action, understated action, action that can be easy to dismiss if you are only listening for words. They may not say you matter in the way you wish they would, but they show up when something important happens. They may not give you perfect clarity, but they remember details you thought passed them by. They may not speak with emotional fluency, yet they make room for you in small ways that push against their usual need for distance. That is why understanding them requires attention, not fantasy, but attention. You start noticing patterns. They check in when they could have stayed silent. They respond when it would have been easier to disappear. They make time in ways that interrupt their comfort. None of this is loud. None of it demands applause. But it is not meaningless either. For someone whose instinct is to detach, even a small step toward connection costs energy. It asks them to move against a deeply wired habit of self-protection. Still, do not romanticize crumbs. That matters too. If the effort stays tiny forever, if it never expands, if it begins to feel like just enough to keep you emotionally invested without building anything real, then the meaning starts to fade. Real effort, even quiet effort, should slowly grow. That is the difference between motion and maintenance. Fear in an avoidant person rarely looks like fear. That is why it gets misread so often. On the outside, it can look like independence, emotional coolness, a need for space, or a calm statement that they just do not want anything too complicated. But under that surface, there is often something much more fragile. Closeness can stir a sense of losing control. Care can feel overwhelming. Intimacy can wake up emotions they do not know how to regulate, and because they cannot name that fear clearly, they act it out through distance. The more meaningful the bond becomes, the more pressure it can create inside them. So when they pull away, it is not always because the connection means little. Sometimes it is because it means too much. And that can be one of the hardest truths to understand when you are on the receiving end. Because what you feel is absence. You feel less contact, less warmth, less certainty. You feel the shutdown, not the struggle. But if this distance is fear rather than indifference, there are often traces left behind. Hesitation instead of finality, mixed signals instead of complete detachment, a feeling that something is being held back rather than erased. This does not remove the hurt. It does not excuse confusion, but it changes the meaning. It shows that what looks like not caring may actually be difficulty handling the intensity of caring. And if you have lived through that kind of push and pull, you know how important that distinction can become. Keep listening, because this is where many people finally start seeing the full picture. Trust builds slowly in someone avoidant, very slowly. It is not a door they throw open. It is more like a lock, turning one click at a time with long pauses between each movement. In the beginning, what they give may feel controlled, edited, carefully measured. They share what feels safe and keep the deeper parts of themselves somewhere behind a wall you can sense but not cross. Yet if something genuine is growing, you begin to notice subtle changes. They stay a little longer in conversations they once escaped. They share a bit more than they used to, even if it still feels incomplete. The space they once needed instantly may take longer to appear. Their first instinct is still to protect, but now it meets another force inside them, a growing willingness to remain. That is important. Growth here is not dramatic. It is often almost invisible unless you are looking for direction instead of perfection. They may still step back, but it looks less absolute. They may still go quiet, but not as long. They may still struggle, but now there is a trace of trying within the struggle. That is what trust looks like in early form. Not flawless openness, not emotional ease. Just a slow increase in tolerance for closeness. But patience must stay connected to reality. If months pass and nothing shifts, if every cycle repeats with the same exact distance and the same exact lack of progress, then what looks like slow change may simply be stagnation wearing a softer face. Real trust leaves evidence. It may be faint, but it leaves a trail. Respect for your boundaries is one of the clearest signs that something meaningful may still be alive here. At first, that can sound basic. It should be basic. But with someone who is deeply sensitive to pressure and easily activated by closeness, the way they respond to your limits says a great deal. When you speak a need out loud, whether it is clarity, steadiness, time, honesty, or emotional consistency, they are faced with a choice. They can disappear further into self-protection, or they can try, however imperfectly, to make room for your reality next to their own. If they begin adjusting in small ways, that means something. Maybe they do not change overnight. Maybe they still struggle. But they remember what you said. They avoid crossing certain lines. They respond when it matters. They show restraint where they once acted only on instinct. This is not dramatic. It may not even feel romantic. But it is significant because it asks them to remain aware of you even while managing themselves. That takes presence. It takes intention. It means your experience is not invisible to them. At the same time, respect must become reliable to carry real value. A boundary honored one week and ignored the next is not stability. It is inconsistency with better timing. So watch the pattern, not the promise. Watch whether they make small but steady corrections. Watch whether your needs become part of the connection instead of an annoyance they tolerate for a moment and then forget. That is how you know the bond is not living only inside your hope. That is how you know something in them is actually listening. Moments of real presence from an avoidant person can feel almost unreal because of how different they are from the distance that usually surrounds them. On the surface, it may seem like a normal conversation, a quiet drive, a shared laugh, a deep look that lasts a little longer than usual. But when those moments come from someone who often holds back, they carry unusual weight. For that short time, the defenses soften. The constant inner management stops. They are not half leaving while sitting beside you. They are simply there. You can feel the difference. Their attention is more grounded. Their responses are not built around escape. Their presence feels less split, less guarded, less hidden behind control. And because it is rare, it can stay with you for a long time. This is where many people get confused. They either dismiss it because it was brief, or they build an entire future out of one beautiful moment. Do neither. Let it mean what it means. Genuine presence matters because it reveals capacity. It shows that connection is possible for them, even if it is hard to sustain. But its real value becomes clear only when it starts linking to action afterward. Do they return with more openness? Do they remain slightly steadier over time? Do those moments become a little more frequent, a little less fragile? That is when a scattered spark starts looking like a real fire trying to stay lit. And if you have seen that kind of presence before, you know it does not feel performative. It feels sincere. Brief, maybe, but deeply sincere. And sometimes sincerity is the first crack in a long-standing wall. Inside an avoidant person, there is often an invisible conflict shaping almost everything they do. One side of them wants the bond. It sees the value of closeness. It feels the comfort, the meaning, the pull of being understood. The other side reacts to that same closeness as danger. It feels exposed, unsteady, too open, too dependent. So they live divided. They move closer and then pull back. They reveal a little and then shut the door. They create intimacy and then act like they need to undo it before it becomes too real. From the outside, this looks contradictory. But inside them, it is often a real struggle between longing and protection. If you pay close attention, you can sometimes see the tension before the retreat, a pause before they go quiet, a softness that suddenly hardens, a deep moment followed by distance that feels almost automatic. Those are signs that the withdrawal is not always coldness. Sometimes it is conflict. And conflict matters because it means both forces are present. If only avoidance existed, there would be no return, no hesitation, no brief closeness, no effort at all. If only desire existed, there would be no repeated distance. The presence of both suggests they are emotionally affected, but divided over what to do with that feeling. Still, inner conflict is meaningful only if it leads somewhere. Tension by itself is not growth. Repeating the same cycle forever is not depth. It is a loop. Real struggle creates friction that slowly changes behavior, even if the change is uneven, even if it is painfully slow. If nothing shifts, then the conflict may be real, but it is not creating a safe future for you. There are also the smaller signs people overlook because they do not seem dramatic enough to count. But with someone avoidant, small signs often carry more truth than grand words. They remember something you said weeks ago and bring it up casually, as if it meant nothing, when in fact it meant enough for them to store it. They check on you after a hard day, not with perfect language, but in a way that tells you your pain stayed on their mind. They notice your mood even when you do not explain it. They find indirect ways to stay connected, sending something random, asking a practical question, making a brief comment that is really just an excuse to reopen the door. These actions can look ordinary to anyone else, but in this kind of dynamic, they are often their version of reaching, their version of saying, "I am still here," even if I do not know how to say that cleanly. Watch also how they react when they sense losing you, not through games, not through panic, but through subtle increases in attention, more effort to reconnect, more signs that your absence lands somewhere inside them. That does not mean you should threaten to leave to test them. Never do that. But when distance becomes real, truth often gets revealed. Someone who feels nothing lets the space stay empty. Someone who is struggling may begin to move. And still, you must stay grounded. A few thoughtful gestures cannot replace emotional accountability. A handful of meaningful moments cannot carry a whole relationship forever. The signs matter, yes, but only when they slowly form a pattern strong enough to stand on. At some point, the question is no longer only whether they care. The deeper question becomes whether their care is becoming usable, livable, and safe for both of you. That is the turning point. Because many people stay too long in painful uncertainty simply because they can feel something real beneath the distance. And sometimes they are right. Sometimes there is something real there. But real feeling is not the same as real readiness. You need both truth and movement, both emotion and responsibility, both connection and growth. If you are always the one translating, waiting, softening, understanding, and holding the emotional weight, then even a meaningful bond can become exhausting. A relationship cannot survive forever on hidden feelings and half-visible effort. Eventually, what is inside must start becoming visible in behavior, more consistency, more honesty, more willingness to stay in hard moments instead of always escaping them. This is where your own clarity matters just as much as theirs. Do not lose yourself trying to decode someone else. Do not call permanent confusion a deep connection. Do not let your empathy become a trap. You can understand their fear and still honor your own limits. You can see their struggle and still ask whether the connection is truly growing. In fact, that is the healthiest thing you can do. Because trying with an avoidant person should never mean abandoning yourself. It should mean noticing what is real, testing it against time, and refusing to build your future on potential alone. And this next part matters more than people think, so do not click away now. If you should keep trying, there will usually be evidence that the bond is stretching beyond the old pattern. The return becomes a little warmer. The silence becomes a little shorter. The honesty comes a little faster. The distance no longer feels like a total disappearance, but a struggle followed by a clearer effort to reconnect. They begin to name small things. They become slightly easier to reach. They remember what hurts you and try, however clumsily, not to repeat it. They still need space, but the space has context now. It has care inside it. It has some sign of awareness. That is what healthy progress can look like here. Not a sudden transformation, not a movie scene, just a slow turning toward emotional maturity. On the other hand, if every return resets the pain without changing the pattern, you are not watching growth. You are watching repetition. If they keep coming back only to reopen the bond without deepening it, if they offer presence in flashes but never build stability, if your needs remain understood in words but ignored in practice, then you may not be witnessing a process. You may be witnessing a cycle. And cycles can feel intense enough to be mistaken for destiny. They are not the same thing. This is why time is such a powerful truth teller. Time reveals whether the same walls are loosening or simply being decorated with nicer moments. Time shows whether someone is truly learning closeness or just returning when the loneliness catches up to them. Pay attention to time. It exposes everything eventually. The hardest part is that avoidant dynamics can create powerful hope. And hope is not always wrong. Sometimes that hope is connected to real movement, real feeling, real effort that is slowly learning how to become love you can actually live inside. But sometimes hope survives on almost nothing. A glance, a return, a deep conversation after weeks of distance, a few soft moments that make all the confusion feel suddenly meaningful. That is why you need a clear inner standard. Ask yourself this: are they just touched by the connection, or are they beginning to take responsibility for it? Are they only affected, or are they also growing? Are they aware of your heart, or only relieved by your patience? These questions matter because deep chemistry can exist beside deep incompatibility. Strong feeling can exist beside chronic instability. And no matter how sincere their inner conflict may be, you still deserve a bond that does not keep asking you to bleed quietly while waiting for someone else to become ready. If you keep trying, let it be because there is movement, not because there is mystery. Let it be because their actions are slowly creating trust, not because their silence makes you chase meaning. Let it be because the connection is asking both people to rise, not just one person to endure. And if you recognize the signs of real growth, then yes, patience may have a purpose. But if all you have is pain wrapped in possibility, that is not always a love story. Sometimes it is a lesson asking to be learned before it costs you more. So the big signs are not flashy. They are quiet, but they are strong. They return, and each return carries a little more awareness. They show brief vulnerability, then slowly learn not to hide from it as quickly. Their effort speaks through action before it can speak through words. Their fear shows hesitation, not complete emotional absence. Trust grows in tiny layers. Your boundaries begin to matter in their behavior. Their moments of presence feel real, and over time, those moments start happening more often and breaking less easily. Their inner conflict does not stay frozen. It begins, however slowly, to create change. That is when trying may still make sense. Not because you are chasing fantasy, but because reality is actually moving. And if you have been wondering whether to hold on or let go, maybe this is the clearest way to see it. Do not ask only, do they feel something? Ask, is what they feel becoming something we can build with? That one question can save you months, sometimes years, of confusion. Because real connection is not only about what exists beneath the surface, it is also about whether that truth can rise into the light and stay there long enough to become trust, peace, and emotional safety. If it can, there may still be something worth holding. If it cannot, then no amount of hidden depth will change the cost of standing in the same storm. And if this made you see your situation differently, sit with that. Sometimes one clear thought changes everything.